Chapter 8. I believe fraud has occurred at Pfizer. Ed Dowd, former Wall Street analyst and BlackRock portfolio manager and author of Cause Unknown, The Epidemic of Sudden Deaths in 2021 and 2022. Ed Dowd is currently a founding partner of Finance Technologies, a global macro-alternative investment firm. He is also author of the new book Cause Unknown, The Epidemic of Sudden Deaths in 2021 and 2022, release date December 13, 2022, Skyhorse Publishing. Edward has worked on Wall Street most of his career, spanning both credit markets and equity markets. Some of the firms he worked for include HSBC, Donaldson, Lufkin and Jenrette, and Independence Investments. Most notably, he was promoted to managing director at BlackRock, where he managed a growth equity portfolio, increasing it from $2 billion over a 10-year span to $14 billion. The following chapter is being read on behalf of the author.
I believe fraud has occurred at Pfizer. What tipped me off to the fraud was primarily the FDA's decision to hide the data for 75 years. In my world, when I see that, I don't need the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times to tell me fraud has occurred. Throughout my whole career, I've seen fraud, over and over again. I make bets with capital, and my bet was that's fraud. The FDA is in on the cover-up. A friend of mine from the biotech industry discovered that Pfizer has failed their all-cause mortality endpoint, and that information was not available to us. When we learned that, it came out in an FOIA request, a Freedom of Information request. I was aware that if you miss the all-cause mortality endpoint, the drug doesn't get approved. It's the gold standard of the FDA. Well, they missed that endpoint. The vaccine got approved, and that's a big deal. I started to really believe that fraud had occurred. And then I started to think, if the FDA is in on it, this reminds me of the great financial crisis of 2008 to 2009, where the rating agencies became corrupted and allowed that fraud to happen. It's called the institutional imperative, where over time an institution acts in the interest of itself, rather than its shareholders, or in the case of the FDA, the stakeholders. We also know that the FDA has 50% of its budget from the pharmaceutical industry, so I believe over time it's been corrupted. Then, with this Operation Warp Speed, which I thought was a disaster from the get-go, corners cut, things rushed, safety protocols ignored, I knew that everything rushed is writ large with errors. It takes 7 to 10 years for a normal vaccine to be tested for safety before it's put into the arms of people. The clinical trial lasted only 28 days, and I knew something was fishy there. I came to the conclusion that the FDA didn't really look at this clinical trial data. They rushed it through due to political pressure. Maybe straight-up bribes, we don't know. But what we do know is that this should never have been approved. I was able to speak to Brooke Jackson, the Ventavis whistleblower who went public in November 2021. Everybody ignored her. The mainstream media ignored her. She called me. What she saw was so much fraud, it was mind-boggling. Jackson oversaw 1,000 patients of the 44,000 patients in the original clinical trial study done by Pfizer. All of them were unblinded. All 1,000. When that happens, that data is supposed to be thrown out per Pfizer protocol. But it was not. It was rolled up. When she became aware of this, she alerted more senior people in her company. That's when the tone changed with her. Then, when they wanted her to get involved in a cover-up, she went to the FDA and made an anonymous whistleblower complaint. This happened at 9 in the morning. By 3 in the afternoon, she was fired. 5 days later, a Pfizer lawyer reached out to her. She ignored him. I think there's enough proof for people to investigate fraud in the clinical data, and the FDA's complicity in this. I think, unfortunately, we have had to wait for real-world evidence, and the real-world evidence is so awful that there's going to be a public outcry. Tragically, it's showing up in real-world data insurance companies and funeral homes, and this is a disaster. The CDC data, their own data, shows what's going on. This is a disaster of epic proportions. The millennial age group saw 61,000 deaths, excess deaths in a 1-year time frame, correlated with an acceleration in the mandates and the boosters in the fall of 2021. They just experienced a Vietnam War in a year. I don't know how this is going to be hidden for much longer. Eventually, the reckoning will come. To listen to the remainder of this essay and the 33 other essays, please visit Audible, Apple Books, or Amazon to receive your copy in print, ebook, or audio. Thank you.